Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker shells, dustly search, peasants, fastest minions, meat sacks. I'm usually a welcome. And apparently, some outline of the supposed Trump proposition for a negotiation and an alteration of the Russia-Ukraine war has come out in Ukraine media. So I don't really know where their source is or how much credibility to give this, but at least it's a possible outline for what we can expect. And although Trump said he would end the war on day one, of course he's only been in there 5 days, 6 days, whatever. This is talking about a possible truce coming up in April, so several months out. But it's an interesting 7 point plan, and I'm going to talk about it here. Of course, the first one is the acknowledgement that Ukraine will not become part of NATO, and that has been one of Putin's main points for quite some time. And Trump has actually come out and publicly said he understands Putin's trepidation about having Ukraine become a member of NATO, and it was one of the linchpins of this whole quagmire. And so that seems pretty important, and why it would be number one. Number two is that instead of becoming a member of NATO, Ukraine would be moving forward, becoming a member of the EU by 2030. And so that's a way to kind of circumvent not becoming a NATO member, and ultimately, even though it's 5 years off, would pave the way in the future for NATO membership for Ukraine. But at least for the time being, that's off the table. And of course, that's a crucial element for Putin accepting any of these terms whatsoever. Number three is the Russian request that the military of Ukraine be reduced, at least in this agreement, is being rejected. And that's understandable. Um, I understand why Putin would want the military capabilities of Ukraine reduced, but that's something the West will not accept under any conditions. So there'll have to be some kind of compromise there. Number four, no official recognition of occupied land. And that's one of the conditions I see as being problematic, although I've discussed the idea that they may come up with a new way to label the breakaway regions of Donbass. As we know now, Putin essentially wants to have the breakaway regions, Ukraine and the Donbass, become federated states in Russia. And so now it looks like they're going to try and put forward a plan to have these areas more respected and integrated into Ukraine. Because let's remember that one of the things that led to this war, and it was an issue for 8 years before Russia ever invaded Ukraine, was the fact that Ukraine was really oppressive towards the Russian-speaking peoples of the Donbass region, prohibiting them from continuing to teach the Russian language, going after their churches and the like. So pretty oppressive. So so anyway, the whole idea that they're going to try and come to an agreement without officially recognizing these occupied lands to be absorbed by Russia um, is something that they can probably compromise on. So that's realistic. Number five is the gradual lifting of sanctions on Russia by the West. And according to this document, the sanctions would, a lot of them would be lifted immediately, but a lot of them would be lifted over time. And so that's dangling a carrot for Russia as well. Although, as we've seen in the news recently, Putin has responded to Trump's threats of more sanctions. And as we've seen, the sanctions haven't really worked. The Russian economy is thriving more than ever, and the sanctions haven't really hurt them, even though they've been pretty broad sanctions. And a lot of them, like confiscating Russian assets around the world and then using the money to give to Ukraine, have been a big issue. But lifting sanctions obviously will be part of this agreement. Number six, Russian participation in Ukraine elections, Russian-speaking peoples in Donbass. And so that's another reference to what I was just talking about, that Ukraine is denied Russian-speaking peoples in the Donbass region participation in Ukraine in general. So this is an attempt to integrate those supposed breakaway regions and ease the oppression on them and have them participate in Ukraine and their elections as a step moving forward. And so it's another reason why we know that official recognition of this occupied land is going to be negotiated so that these breakaway regions kind of remain neutral, don't become part of Russia, and somehow get reintegrated into Ukraine. And then number 7, the whole question of having UN peacekeepers there for any truce or ceasefire moving forward. Of course, Zelensky is demanding something like 200,000 UN peacekeepers in Ukraine, and I think that would be too much of a provocation to Russia. It would be a sticking point, and so they're going to have to negotiate that. But I don't think that the West would really want to get in a position where they have 200,000 troops in Ukraine to maintain any kind of ceasefire or truce. They're going to have to deal with that on their own. And then, of course, in addition to that, there's plans to essentially start with a truce sometime in April. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a long ways off. Theoretically, they're going to come up with some kind of ceasefire agreement before that, and then an actual truce, and then somehow move that forward to create some kind of peace plan. And so there's a lot of things about this that are problematic. I foresee at some point that Zelensky will have to be removed by the West in order to facilitate any kind of peace or truce or ceasefire moving forward. I could be wrong, but it seems like he's a complete impediment. And finally, we have voices being heard in the West talking about the corruption and the problems with the Zelensky regime undermining any efforts to move towards peace up to now. And of course, we know the West has undermined all previous efforts to have any kind of ceasefire, truce, or peace. So they've actively been sabotaging all the efforts up to this point. But Trump's in office now, and he may be more willing to set up some kind of agreement and then facilitate it and then honor it, which certainly hasn't been on the table before. So like I said in the beginning of this video, I'm not really sure where the source of this proposal comes from and where Ukraine media got it, but it sounds like a reasonable approximation of what any kind of agreement would have and all the elements it would contain. So there's some credibility. So we'll have to keep our eyes open to see what kind of agreement that Trump is actually pushing towards. But in the meantime, interesting to hear, and I think one way or another, Trump is going to be very adamant about coming to some agreement and ending this war. It's been one of his main platforms, and with his strong leadership, regardless of how you may feel about him, he is providing strong leadership, and one way or another, he's going to get some approximation of what he wants. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?